and there ain't much, he said, right? So, but I am for the black people who fought for freedom and for this revolution for abolition and for them taking their struggle to Canada and Thomas Peters leading it from Canada over to Sierra Leone, where they actually organized a radical democracy. And this was fought by the abolitionist company which had created the colony. So there was a big struggle, and historians have miswritten about this, that it's a case of black nationalism, an early case of black nationalism in Africa. Now actually, black nationalism, like in Nkrumah, it's often nonviolent, like Gandhi. You know, Gandhi was in South Africa once upon a time, had a big influence on Nelson Mandela. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions after the South African Revolution, probably the most civilized way of trying to heal conflict. You know, if we could get a decent settlement of the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, Truth and Reconciliation would be a central part of it. And Bishop Tutu, by the way, came, the first time he came to Israel, they ignored him, and I think they threw rocks at him. I don't know. You know, he hadn't won the Nobel Prize yet. But then he came back, and he describes in No Future Without Forgiveness how people were suddenly very interested, which they should be, because really life will continue to exist on this planet if there is movements toward recognizing the humanity of Palestinians who have been tremendously oppressed. And if there isn't, you know, there might be crazy bombing of Iran by us or by Netanyahu. And frankly, if you take the increased war and turmoil in the Middle East and you project 15, 20 years, the likelihood of the use of nuclear weapons goes way up. And we are the leading militarists in the world. We spend $1 trillion a year on the military. I often ask my students this, so I won't bore you with it, but we have 1,280 military bases abroad. On the Super Bowl a year ago, one of the sports announcers recognized the troops in 177 countries who are watching the Super Bowl. What a thrill. He didn't ask why. You won't hear that on the corporate or bankers' news. Whatever the mainstream, whatever you want to call the corrupt mainstream news in the United States. And they cut it out of this Super Bowl. They did flash to some soldiers watching it, but they were told, do not mention 177 countries again. Thank you. Right? Because somebody's going to ask, didn't we fight the British? And you're going to want to populate, I mean, you know, you can figure out that if you invade a country which has the relationship to Al-Qaeda that Mexico had to Pearl Harbor, that's Richard Clarkson, you know, and you occupy the place, that's our occupation in Iraq, you're not going to win a popularity contest, especially because you don't speak the language. And you can figure it for Afghanistan too. It was not a good project when it started out, when it had some rationale, and the rationale quickly was lost, and the occupation has been a horror. And by the way, right now, 68% of Americans in the last kept poll by the elite. I won't go into how they're badly organized, these polls. But anyway, 68% want the U.S. out of Afghanistan. The only reason we're there right now is Obama, who was an anti-war candidate when he ran sort of, has been keeping us in there, right? And using a lot of his prestige. And the other party, the main party of the 1/10 of 1%, they want to keep us in there more, right? So it's a hell of an alternative. So if you go on this question of why I pursued this, I pursued this because it struck me as inherently interesting that there were so many blacks who had been in the American Revolution. The case of slavery being challenged in this way was so interesting. And I quickly realized there was an international revolution, a second revolution, which was going on at the same time. And Nash wrote a book called The Forgotten Fifth, treating it as identity politics. You know, blacks, they have their politics. And then we'll have indigenous politics. Why not? Some indigenous people fought and they got cheated worse than blacks. Treated worse than blacks. It isn't identity politics, it's about freedom. You ain't a free regime if you commit genocide against other people. Jews had genocide committed against them in Europe, and I speak as a Jew. But the fact is, there were people on the land which Israel was allowed to settle, and Israel drove them out in a form, as Ilan Pappé calls it, of ethnic cleansing. And the attempt to do a second form, which is Greater Israel, first was a crime. It was a crime which was mitigated by the crime committed against the Jews. But there's no mitigation for the second crime. And this cannot be allowed to stand. So, I went into this because this is really a question of right. It is a question of freedom. It is a question for which people have stood up way back when people didn't realize it. It is a story of heroism in the American Revolution which far exceeds that of the founding fathers. And I will conclude this part, so we have questions and answers, with a wonderful statement by Gabriel. Gabriel also was a free black who lived in Virginia, and he organized a slave revolt along with a couple of white radicals who had been in the French Revolution, and a guy named Charles Kersey. And they met in old bars and they pursued this stuff. And unfortunately, the night that they were going out to burn the wooden city of Richmond to the ground, which probably would have put an end to slavery in the United States had they succeeded in doing it. There was a huge storm. And for the first time, the elite Virginia court wind of this. And there were battles, but they seized the leaders. And Gabriel was put on trial for his life in Richmond. And what Gabriel said is characteristic of the moral judgments of the American Revolution and characteristic of Christian moral judgments. And is defined in John Rawls' theory of justice as, if you want to make a moral argument, think about the people who are least advantaged. Put yourself in their position and ask what a society would look like that would be cooperative and free from their point of view. So, this is the idea that we're all in together as free people. Not that, unfortunately, Rawls has some phrases about chain connection which sound like all boats rise together, meaning, what Mitt Romney thinks. If you believe that, there's a bridge in Brooklyn you might like to buy too. Or, not, you might watch out walking out of the doors. But there is a serious idea here. And Rawls' theory, and I knew Rawls, so I actually told him about this research before he died. We had an interesting conversation about it, because he's very anti-racist. What Gabriel said was this, at his trial. I have only to say what George Washington would have said if he had been captured by the British and put on trial by them. I have but one life to give for my countrymen, and I am a willing sacrifice in their cause.